Evan clutched the heavy dragon-hide volume to his chest as the first-floor windows imploded. He could hear the distinct, rhythmic thud of the crushing grip hex, a high-level atmospheric manipulation used by the Dark Lord's inner circle to collapse structures from the outside in. His wand hand was slick with sweat and copper-scented blood from a splintered rib he'd sustained when the drawing-room ceiling came down. He had 30 seconds. He cast a point-blank apparition, not to escape the grounds, which were anchored by a heavy air jinx, but to move 10 feet into the reinforced cellar. The magical fatigue hit him like a physical blow, a dull ache behind his eyes that signaled his core was nearing depletion. 3 months ago, Evan had been the one drafting the containment protocols for these very ledgers. He remembered the cold precision in the Dark Lord's voice during the briefing in the Wiltshire cellar. Voldemort had explained that information was a liability once its purpose was served. At the time, Evan thought it was a warning directed at their enemies. He hadn't realized he was the liability. The Dark Lord didn't just want the records destroyed, he wanted the memory of their existence purged from the minds of those who wrote them. The method was a variant of the obliviation charm, amplified by a ritual circle, requiring the death of the primary witness to act as a psychic anchor for the erasure. The cellar door exploded into 1,000 wooden teeth.
Antonin Dolohov stepped through the dust, his wand held in a low, tactical position. There was no malice in his eyes, only the professional detachment of an operative completing a checklist. Rosier fired a silent blasting curse, but Dolohov deflected it with a flick of his wrist. The energy dissipated into the damp stone walls. Evan checked his internal clock. 15 seconds. If he could ignite the ledger using a cursed flame, he might survive, but the bloodbind would jump to him, incinerating his nervous system instantly. As we witness the cold, calculated purging of those who gave everything for the dark arts, it becomes clear that the greatest threat to a Death Eater wasn't the ministry, but the master they served. If you find these declassified accounts of the wizarding world's darkest operations compelling, consider subscribing and joining our effort to document the truth that was meant to stay buried. Evan backed into the corner, his boots crunching on broken glass. He had one spell left in his reserve. He didn't aim for Dolohov. He aimed for the ceiling support beam. The wood groaned but held. Dolohov didn't miss. A purple streak of flame, Dolohov's signature curse, caught Evan in the shoulder. The pain was absolute, a searing heat that bypassed the skin and began to cook the muscle underneath. Evan collapsed, the ledger sliding across the floor. Dolohov stepped forward and retrieved the book. He didn't finish Evan off. He didn't need to.
The Dark Lord was already outside, beginning the ritual that would use Evan's dying consciousness to wipe the event from the minds of every other Death Eater involved in the winter offensive. The logic of the operation was a masterclass in intelligence security. By using a follower's death as the fuel for a mass memory wipe, Voldemort created a perfect information vacuum. The other Death Eaters would wake up the next morning knowing the mission was successful, but they would have no memory of the ledger, no memory of the Rosier estate, and eventually no memory of Evan Rosier himself. They wouldn't even know they were missing a comrade. The method worked because it exploited the psychic link shared by those marked with the Dark Lord's brand. The Dark Mark wasn't just a badge of loyalty. It was a back door into their minds, a frequency Voldemort could use to broadcast a selective amnesia. The real-time collapse of Evan's mind happened in seconds. Spell by spell, move by move, the Dark Lord dismantled his memories. He saw his initiation, the faces of his parents, the first time he cast a killing curse, all of it turning to grey smoke. The ledger in Dolohov's hand began to glow with a sickly green light as the bloodbind was forcibly severed by the ritual. Evan's heart slowed. He realized in his final moments that the invisible plan wasn't about the Ministry at all. It was about making the Death Eaters themselves invisible to history.
If no one remembered the crimes never happened. If the soldiers didn't exist, there was no army to hunt. When the sun rose over the Rosier estate, there was nothing left but a scorched crater that the Muggles would later attribute to a gas leak. The Ministry files on Evan Rosier were found empty the following Monday, the ink having vanished from the parchment as if it had never been written. No one in the inner circle asked where Evan was. They didn't even notice his seat was empty. The names were erased, the files were sealed by silence, and the graves were left unmarked in the woods behind the manor. Voldemort had achieved the ultimate tactical advantage, a ghost army that didn't even know it was haunting the world. Power in the wizarding world is not just the ability to cast a spell, it is the absolute control over what is allowed to be remembered. When the truth is a threat, the only security is total oblivion. Share your thoughts on this operation in the comments and subscribe to keep uncovering the hidden history of the Wizarding Wars. File closed. Operation Blackout. This is a fan fiction story and does not belong to the Harry Potter canon. Would you like me to create another script for a different Vertente, perhaps focusing on the Department of Mysteries or Dumbledore's long games? At the Ministry of Magic, the effect was instantaneous and silent.
Inside the records room, the quill dedicated to the Rosier lineage simply ceased its movement, the ink turning into clear water before evaporating entirely. This was no mere concealment, it was a retroactive administrative purge. The clerks overseeing the lineage scrolls felt a momentary lapse in concentration, a brief vertigo that passed as quickly as it arrived. When they looked back at their ledgers, the name Evan Rosier was no longer there, and more importantly, they no longer possessed the cognitive framework to realize a name had ever occupied that specific line of parchment. The surviving members of the Inner Circle gathered at Malfoy Manor 3 days later, unaware of the void in their ranks. Bellatrix Lestrange felt a nagging sensation of a missed appointment, a phantom memory of a conversation about the winter offensive that now felt like a dream she couldn't quite recall. The dark mark on her arm pulsed with a faint cold light, a diagnostic signal from the Dark Lord confirming that the psychic anchor had successfully settled. This was the true genius of the tactical erasure. Voldemort didn't just hide his plans from the enemy, he hid them from his own soldiers, ensuring that even under Veritaserum, no one could betray a secret. The intelligence value of this operation was realized during the subsequent infiltration of the Department of International Magical Cooperation.
With the ledger destroyed and the witnesses eliminated, the Dark Lord was able to replace key officials with polyjuiced decoys without any record of the original targets ever existing. The paper trail that should have led the Auras to the Wiltshire safehouses was gone, replaced by a vacuum that swallowed every investigator who ventured too close. This strategic silence allowed the Death Eater machine to expand its reach into European ministries, operating with a level of anonymity that made the resistance look like child's play. In the dark corridors of power, the most effective weapon is not the wand, but the eraser. Evan Rosier's death was not a sacrifice for a cause, but a necessary deletion for a system that demanded absolute invisibility. The Dark Lord understood that a martyr is a liability, but a ghost is a tool. As the files were sealed and the last traces of the operation were buried under layers of false history, the wizarding world continued its slow slide into a darkness it could no longer define or name. The operation proved that in the game of shadows, the one who controls the past controls the survival of the future, leaving only silence behind. This is a fan fiction story and does not belong to the Harry Potter canon. Would you like me to move on to a new operation, or should we refine this script further for your channel? Years later, when the Ministry's post-war commission attempted to reconstruct the timeline of the first conflict, they encountered a structural impossibility. The financial trails led to empty vaults, and the logistics of the 1978 offensive seemed to lack a commanding officer. Historians eventually coined the term the Rosier Void to describe this localized anomaly where events occurred without agents. This was the final success of the operation, the complete divorce of action from identity. The Dark Lord had not just killed a man, he had surgically removed a piece of reality's tapestry, leaving a hole that even time-turners could not bridge. The file remains locked in the archives of the Unspeakables, a testament to a war fought by men who were deleted before they could even fall.